Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Global Missions Podcast. My name is Mags, and I will be your host for today's episode. We're going to be talking with Billy McMahan, who is a research specialist and a mobilizer for Africa Inland Mission, helping us understand Gen Z. This is a group of people, we'll talk about some of the details, but they're the young adults of today's church. And we want to better understand what makes them tick, what we can do to help disciple them and bring out their beautiful potential for God's purposes. We've entitled this episode, Mobilizing the Dreamer Generation. Well, thanks for joining us for today's conversation. We do show notes for every episode. I think it's especially important in this case. There's some great resources that Billy has offered, including his paper. It is a significant paper. I've got to say, it's about 19 pages, so it's like reading a deep chapter on Gen Z. And there you can see all his ideas, both what he's learned about Gen Z and the suggestions he has for discipleship and mobilization of this generation. We want to invite you to subscribe, of course, on your favorite platform, or join us on Instagram and YouTube, where we have more and more video content there. And it's just a different way of engaging with our guests. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Global Missions Toolbox, and we invite you to stop by and check out the resources, especially for senders that have been curated there. It's globalmissionstoolbox.com. And if you'd like more from the podcast, up in the upper right, you'll find the tab, and that's where the search engine is. You can go by topic or just scan through the various episodes that we have done previously. We look forward to publishing again in 2 weeks, so we invite you to join us then. We'll continue this conversation about being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth. Our guest on today's episode is Billy McMahan, and he serves with an organization, shout out to Africa Inland Mission. Woo. He is a mobilizer for part of the United States, and we just love this faithful organization that you're serving with, Billy. Thank you for being a mobilizer there.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, he did mention, too, that he gets to mobilize sometimes in Hawaii, which sounds like a pretty nice perk for a mobilizer as well. Billy also serves as the president of the Great Commission Research Network, and we're going to dive a little bit today into some research that he has conducted. He has over 15 years of experience working with next generation folks in the church and in parachurch ministries, including some missionary time in Asia and Indonesia. He provides coaching and consulting for organizations and business who really want to do a great job of welcoming the new generation. Billy, thanks for joining us on the Global Missions Podcast.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me. And if any of you listening do know somebody in Hawaii that is interested in going to Africa, please let me know. That would be amazing.
Well, listen, just before we get into our discussion today, how did you become passionate about Gen Z and these emerging generations? We'll get to Gen Z in a second, but how'd you get here?
Yeah, it's a long story, but like Mag said, I spent some time in Indonesia with my wife. We felt like we got there. We were living the dream. Felt like we found our spot, and God was moving. We were working with the Sundanese people in Bandung, and in the way God does, God kind of closed the door. And I tell everybody that I got banished to student ministry after that. So we ended up moving from Indonesia to Silicon Valley, San Jose, California. And I plugged into a church, and really, honestly, that transition was hard. It kind of felt like God pulled the rug out from under me. And really, probably the first year into my assignment there in San Jose, kind of came to the realization. I was like, okay, if I can't be the one that is going overseas working with unreached peoples, that I'm going to raise up as many as I can to go in my stead. So that's what we kind of set out doing. And so really, like, my heart for Gen Z really came out of that season of like, okay, how do we reach them? How do we disciple them? And how do we send them? Really the whole spectrum of walking with young adults and launching them out into the Great Commission.
Thank you. I do want to spend just a minute or two defining Gen Z so that just as we start this conversation, everybody's kind of in that space. We've heard about baby boomers and the silent generation and Gen Xers and all of this stuff. When we talk about Gen Z today, who are we speaking about? How do you define it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Gen Z, and every generational researcher kind of has a little bit different definition, but for the purposes of this conversation, we're going with Gen Z as anybody born between 1997 and 2011, which means that this year, right now, Gen Z is between the ages of 11 and 27. So it's a really broad group of young adults. It's like seventh grade all the way up to like they're just kind of starting out in early career, which is why right now, especially, everybody is asking the same question of what do we do with this next generation? Business leaders, church planting organizations, and sending organizations are all kind of wrestling with what do we do with it. So then I would be defined as a millennial, and millennial generation is 1981 to 1996. Just for frame of reference.
Oh, it's helpful because we're really, well, many churches might call them young adults, high schoolers, college age, into the workforce, perhaps in that zone. So for those of you listening, perhaps already you have some folks from your church coming to mind. And we hope that this discussion would be helpful to churches as well. And then, of course, our audience in particular is interested in global work as well. So Billy will help us go to some of those places. One of the terms that you use for this group, Gen Z, Billy, is the dreamer generation. I really like that. It feels optimistic to me. It's full of hope and just positive potential. Why did you adopt this name?
Yeah, so it really came out of my time on the front lines in ministry. Like somewhere in the time of being a youth pastor, I saw a pretty dramatic shift in kind of the way they were talking about worldview and talking about the things that they wanted to do with their lives. And it's really like the next generation is dreaming about making the world a better place. They're dreaming of impact. They're dreaming of world change. You don't have to convince them that the world is broken. In previous generations, I think that that was more of a theme where it's like, especially in our gospel conversations, like you kind of had to take them to the brokenness. But now it feels like that they know the world is broken, and they've also grown up in an age where the world has been changing so rapidly that they believe that change is possible. So in a lot of the conversations that I'm having with young adults, it's like you don't have to help them figure out where to go. They know what they want to do. They know where they want to go, and they're dreaming of making the world a better place.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. Well, I'm looking forward to reviewing and learning some more about this generation. Billy's done a bunch of research. In fact, there's a very significant paper that I read, much of this long title, Innovations in Engaging the Next Generation Towards Discipleship and Mission. Billy, help us understand what are some of the things that define this group?
Yeah, I've already touched on a couple of them, but number one, like the Delta generation. So in 2018, the New York Times actually set out, they were seeing a dip in their readership. So they went out onto the streets of New York City and they started asking young adults, teenagers at that point, what, if you could pick anything, what would you want to be called? Like trying to figure out the name. They've been called a lot of different things, like iGen and Gen Z. And anyway, they went out onto the streets and they started asking. And this was one quote from a young adult in New York City that I thought really just kind of hit the nail on the head. She said that they wanted to be called the Delta generation. And she said, Delta is used to denote change and uncertainty in mathematics and the sciences. And my generation was shaped by change and uncertainty. That was in 2018. So think about all the change and all the unsettledness and all of the craziness that has happened since 2018. It's only become more true. Um, so that's one thing. They're used to change. They see change all the time, and it really trickles into how they trust things, it trickles into the way they view the world. And it's like nothing is stable. Everything is unsettled. And they're used to change, which also in the missions conversation presents a huge opportunity for missions organizations because, missionaries, they have to be adaptable. They have to be willing to change. They have to be kind of on the move all the time. So that's number one. Number two, digital natives. They are the first generation that has grown up completely in the age of the smartphone. So it's just part of life. It's not new. It's something. So every time they have a question, instead of going to the dictionary, or the encyclopedia. They're just Googling it and they get their answers in seconds. So a recent study came out. The average Gen Zer is spending 4.8 hours per day on social media alone and 8+ hours per day on screens. So if you think about what's shaping them, it's social media. They're spending so much time on social media. And if you do the numbers and you kind of play that out, 4.8 hours a day, that means in just 5.5 years, the average teenager would have spent an entire year on social media alone. That's not counting video games. It's not counting like computers for homework. That's just social media. It's crazy. And I think that plays directly into this next one. They are the lonely generation. Um, I sit down with the average young adult, the average teenager, what I hear more often than anything is that they feel lonely. So they're the most connected generation of all time, but they're also the loneliest generation of all time, because while they're connecting via online platforms and social media, it's not meeting that need for belonging and friendship and just all of that. So a study that was done pre-COVID said that 73% of 18 to 22-year-olds are identifying with feeling loneliness. Post-COVID, that number climbed to 79%. And then you hear more and more about mental health issues among the next generation and things like that. So 43% of Gen Z has been diagnosed with a mental health condition. So these numbers are staggering, and they've got to be in the conversation as you're walking with young adults. It's got to be a core conversation. The churches need to be equipped in this, because the church is well positioned because we've got the source of all hope. So casting the reason for that hope is critical. The next one is they have a deep desire for mentorship. 83% of Gen Z say that they would love to have a mentor. They would love to have a discipler, which is amazing. It creates a huge opportunity for the church. But then you overlay these numbers with stats that are coming out of Barna. Barna recently did a study, and they said 79% of pastors are saying the church is not rising up to their responsibility to train up the next generation. So you have 83% that's saying that they want a mentor, and then you have almost 80% of pastors that are saying we're not rising up to the responsibility to train up the next generation. And it's like these two missing ships. And I really don't believe. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, sometimes, in ministry and as we go about all of these things, we're going to have blind spots, right? Things that we have gaps that we don't realize. That sounds like a gap that's pretty definitively defined by both sides. So, yeah, I love that we're going to talk about what do we do about it.
I don't believe that it's pastors not identifying that as a need. Like, they know that there's a need. They have a desire for mentorship. They have a desire for the next generation. It's just pastors are overloaded. Like, I spent 15 years in pastoral ministry, and it's like, there's just not time. So really, I think the answer is raising up the lay leaders, raising up Jesus followers everywhere of every kind to walk with and lock arms with the next generation. And then the final kind of characteristic that I've identified is they're the corrective generation. This quote comes from Kevin Brown, who is the president at Asbury University. And this is something that he said as the Asbury outpouring happened several years ago. This is what he said. He said, Gen Z is emerging as a corrective to the casual Christianity that has marked our religious landscape and characterized our de-churching movement. There is hunger for something more. So looking at everything that he was witnessing on his campus, this is something that he said. And I think it really kind of hits the nail on the head. As I talk with the next generation, they're looking at the way church has been done for most of their lives, the expression of Christianity that they've seen. And in a lot of places, it kind of boils down to a Sunday morning service where you go and you listen, and they're looking at that and they're like, is it real? Like, they're asking the question, is that a real, true relationship with God that impacts me and impacts the world around me in a positive way? And sadly, they just feel like if this is a loving God that cares about people and cares about the world, why is it not impacting the world in a positive way? So that's something that they're seeing. And with all of that, they're emerging as kind of a counter to that. So in a lot of ways, I feel like God is raising up a generation with these kind of core attributes that casts a lot of reason for hope, because I feel like it's going to correct a lot of our weaknesses as the global church. I think it's going to correct a lot of the weaknesses as they begin to step into leadership and kind of lean into some of these areas.
Well, I'll be hopeful with you. And just as we mentioned, these young people would be between a range of early teens through to their mid to toward the later 20s now. They're coming online as adults, and there's opportunity to serve in our churches. There's a great need. I wonder if, the concepts are so helpful. I wonder what it looks like. What's it going to look like? What have you seen? I guess this is, if a church is doing a really good job of welcoming Gen Z in, how can we step up to this, Billy? What are you seeing, or what churches have you seen beginning to really come online well?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I've so I had the opportunity to kind of explore the landscape and pop into several next gen ministries that are really gaining traction. And there were kind of several themes that really emerged in that. And a lot of them really lean into these kind of core characteristics. So, number one, they're creating spaces where belonging is really happening, and they're finding friends, and they're finding their community, and they're finding their identity, which really speaks into that loneliness kind of characteristic of the next generation. Number two, they're really leaning into purpose. So as I walk with young adults, one of the first conversations that I have, and not one of the first, but one of the early conversations that I have with them is, what are you dreaming about? Like, what is your dream? What are you imagining that you want to do with your life? And oftentimes, that kind of creates a starting point. So you can kind of tap into that, and then as you're walking with the next generation, as you're walking with young adults, especially as you're walking towards the mission field and kind of casting a vision for unreached people groups, leaning into that purpose and that desire that they have to change the world. It's a core thing. And then mentorship. One of the things that I see more often than anything, and I think one of the reasons why there's such a gap in this space of mentorship and discipleship, is there's this false narrative. And honestly, like, I'm going to own it. I think it comes from the millennial generation. There's this idea from older generations that the younger generations don't want what we have to offer. That they don't want to hear my opinions. They don't want to hear like what I think. They don't want to hear the answers that as I've kind of walked with Jesus for a long time. But all of the data and all the conversations that I'm having with young adults stands pretty starkly against that. So I think that the disconnect is this false narrative from older generations that they don't want to hear what we have to offer. But then you have younger people longing for it. But the disconnect is the younger generations don't know how to ask for mentorship. They don't know how to enter into those conversations. So what it's going to take is older generations pursuing them in those relationships and really positioning themselves in relationship and in trust, and in order to kind of create that space.
Well, this is really helpful to kind of think through this. I'm even probably a little older than you are. I'm sure of that. But what I hear you saying is that it might feel uncomfortable for us, because we might not have looked for that type of input. We were not looking to find that. And so we're in our own space. We're saying we'd be reluctant to give it out because we didn't look for it. But you're pressing us to reconsider that and say, make sure, find other ways to verify. Would input from a previous generation? I'm a Gen Xer, you're millennial. Millennial, right? I just feel I want to go back. Too many of my words. I want your words, not mine. So this is where Maggie will just mark this, and we'll break out a section here. I want to just mention that discomfort, though, because if it's not natural for me, then I think it's natural for them. That's what I want to bring out. Okay, thanks, Maggie. We can jump back in about here anyway. I appreciate thinking this through with you because, as someone from a previous generation, not a Gen Z, I'd be Gen X, my inclination is not to seek out that type of input into my life. And so I don't naturally offer it. That's what I hear you saying. And we shouldn't fall to our natural selves, but think through what's really going to benefit them. And they do want input. Am I understanding right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think oftentimes, like, there's this, I think, one, a lot of us never experienced discipleship and mentorship. So it feels really uncomfortable to kind of step into that. And then there's also this narrative of the next generation that they don't want they don't want what we have to offer. And then there's this dynamic of, and I have people asking me this all the time. It's like, okay, I get it. I get the vision. I get the heart. But how do I establish that initial relationship in order to take it into mentorship and discipleship? And I think that the answer for that is, where are the young adults showing up in your church, or in your context, and how can you plug into that space? So hanging out in the youth group is a really core spot, and it won't happen immediately, but as you become a regular there and they know your face and they know your story, that's when you can begin to pursue them. I think also, especially in churches, we have this temptation to kind of programatize, and I don't know if that's a word, but to create a program or a Sunday school type setting. But what they're looking for is the relationship, so that they know that you're real. They know that you really care about them. So I think the best place for this to happen is in coffee shops, or even better, it's in your living room and at your dining room table. So you're inviting them to your house, you're sharing the meal. And as you begin to do that, you create trust, and you create trust by being authentic and honestly being vulnerable in some of the spots, sharing the times in your life where you have questioned God's goodness, sharing the times in your life where you've struggled with depression, because that's where they're at. That's what journeying with Jesus is like a legit follower of Jesus. There's ups and there's downs, and there's times where you're like, God, what are you doing? But I think oftentimes from the stage on Sunday, that kind of disappears, because there's this temptation to feel like we've got life figured out.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, listen, we're going to take a break in just a moment, but I really appreciate you mentioning this because it's practical, and perhaps you've seen, Billy, churches that are doing this. Well, you mentioned youth groups, and you know, as a previous generation, it feels a little weird for me to say, well, how do I engage with the youth group or with the young adults group? Have you seen churches doing this really well? And if you have, what kind of tangible things might a church do to try and generate this crossover?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as a youth pastor, I think that there's oftentimes a temptation I need to find young leaders that can pour in and connect with the young students, right? But I think one of the best things that any youth pastor can do, or any pastor, wherever you're at, is stacking it with the grandmas and grandpas. Stack your student ministry and share that space with the grandmas and grandpas, because what I hear often, and this comes from Austin Rockwell, who started this amazing ministry out of Grand Canyon University. And it's now, I think they started 4 years ago, and now they're on like 20 college campuses. Camp Love. They're growing like crazy. But he defines Gen Z as zealous. Like, they have zeal. Gen Z has zeal right now. And older generations are the long, faithful followers of Jesus. And there needs to be a pairing of the two. They're looking for mentorship, and you need to pair the zeal of Gen Z with the long, faithful followers of Jesus who have been through the ups and downs of walking with Jesus, and really yeah. So I think stack your student ministry with old people, the gray hairs, and see what happens, and train them up in pursuing them and casting hope in that space is the way to start.
Be gentle with us old people, right? You got to be gentle with us too. But I love that we're sparking the cross-generational fabric of the body of Christ here, right? Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Before we continue our conversation with Billy, we'd like to share with you this resource that we hope will be helpful to you and your church.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here today. If you're loving this conversation with Billy and you want to take a next step, we've got something really special for you. Billy has created a free companion resource to go along with today's episode. It's a short, practical guide to help you mobilize Gen Z for missions. Inside, you'll find simple, actionable steps to disciple, mentor, and empower young people to live on mission for Jesus wherever He leads them. You can download it right now using the link in today's show notes or on our website, globalmissionstoolbox.com. It's a great tool to help you reimagine how you walk alongside and develop the next generation of mission-minded leaders. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll get back to the episode right now.
We are back with Billy and talking a bit more about Gen Z and how we can effectively disciple and invite them into missions. I appreciated the way, Billy, you talked about programs in the church, youth groups and groups here. I'd like to go next to just kind of a personal model. You have a chance to interact with young people. How do you go about this? What do you use as a framework to engage?
Yeah. So for me, I mean, like I shared at the very beginning, like this really came out of my journey of getting back to the States and wrestling with God and all that. But I have a huge heart for evangelism. And I think in our evangelism, in the way that we reach the next generation, I think there's a few keys that we can lean into. Number one, lean into that purpose, that desire they have for change. They know that the world is broken. Lean into that passion that they've got. I really do believe that a lot of these things are emerging because God is kind of stirring within the next generation and crafting them. So lean into that, and then also lean into the belonging of the church. Like this is a place where you can find home. This is a place where you can find community. This is a place where you can really find your place. And then as we lean into discipleship, it's this message of, I'm going to walk with you towards that goal. And I oftentimes, I think we start with this grand vision of how we're going to change the world, but stepping into that space of let's go together is a key spot in the discipleship. And it's this message of let's pursue that together. And I'm going to walk with you, and I'm going to leverage my influence and my platforms, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you walk towards that direction being framed under God's will for your life and your calling and all of that. Like, let's go together. And then the last one is send. And I think it really ties into those first couple. It's like, how do we cast a vision for the next generation of the role that they could play for the Great Commission? And for that, this is one of the key pieces that I think is missing in a lot of our discipleship and in a lot of our conversations. It's calling out the gold that God has placed in them. Like, what are the gifts that you see in these young adults? What are the unique gifts that you see in them? And then help them frame that under like a Great Commission assignment. Like, what is that role? Like, is it teaching? Do they have a passion for teaching? Is that something that you see in them? And then help them understand how that fits into the reaching of unreached peoples, like plugging into that. Or is it something else? Is it a support kind of role? Like, what are the things that you see in them, and affirm that and help them understand that God has placed that in them so that He can be known and be glorified.
Billy, you have identified in your research what you've called 6 key identifiers to help us in the church really understand and get traction as we disciple and invite Gen Z into missions. I'm going to read these for our listeners. I'm going to read through the list of 6 quite quickly, and Billy and I are just going to go deep on a couple of them, and the rest we can direct you to the research paper that's written with links. These are the 6. Number 1, leveraging social media. Number 2, relational ministry. Oh, okay, now you see I'm reading off my page, Maggie. Sorry. Why am I finding this so weighty here, sort of? One more time. Let's see. Leverage of this authentic community, discipleship and mentorship, compelling vision, authenticity and vulnerability, and crafting leadership opportunities. Okay. Billy, I've appreciated that in your research, you lifted out 6 key identifiers to help us in the church do a great job of discipleship and inviting Gen Z into global missions. I'm going to read the list of 6 factors for those just listening. I'll read through the whole list quick, and then we'll go deep on a couple of them. This is the list. Number 1, leverage social media. Number 2, build authentic community. Number 3, practice discipleship and mentorship. Number 4, create a compelling vision. Number 5, maintain authenticity and vulnerability. And number 6, craft leadership opportunities. An amazing list. We will have that in the show notes. Billy, which 2 do you want to go deep on?
I think that there's 2 that seem to be the most difficult, especially for churches to really lean into. So number 1, I would say crafting leadership opportunities. Somewhere in decades past, I feel like in the church, we had shifted to this culture of performance where it's almost like we guard the stage so closely that it has created this lack of opportunity for young leaders to be able to rise up. And I don't know about you, Max, but for me, like I grew in my leadership and in my capacity by having the opportunity to be able to lead. So, for example, this is one example, and this is not the only example by any means, but preaching. Like I served at a church for a long time and they wouldn't even give me the opportunity to be able to do announcements. And it's like, how am I supposed to grow as a preacher if I'm not getting opportunities to preach? So I think we need to lower the bar of performance and create within our churches this culture of development and this culture of we're going to be a factory for developing leaders. And it'll take time for the church to kind of get behind that because people react strongly to especially sermons. Like they either engage or don't. And they're like, if a certain preacher is preaching, they'll choose to come. I've heard that from Francis Chan a while back. Like people would pull up at his church and decide that they didn't want to come if he wasn't preaching. And that broke his heart, which ultimately led to him transitioning out of his church because he was like, this is broken. But we need to be intentional about creating space for young leaders to rise up into that leadership opportunities. And then also, like on our church elder boards, do we have young adults on those teams? Like, do they have the opportunity to lead? Do they have the opportunity to contribute? So how in our churches and in our organizations, like missional organizations, how do we raise up young leaders and give them opportunities to be able to lead and learn and grow, especially as leaders into the leaders that they're called to be? And then I think the other thing is this, we've been talking a lot about it, but discipleship and mentorship. And again, it can't just be paid staff at our churches that is driving this. So how do we lean into discipleship and mentorship? I do think it needs to be led from the top. The top leaders at our churches need to be modeling this and prioritizing it, but then also bringing in lay leadership to be able to walk alongside these young adults and really let that be a core fabric of our churches. Because here's one thing that I've been amazed by is God's doing something, especially in North America, among the next generation. So several years ago, Barna reported the lowest church engagement that they've ever recorded in 33 decades, 30 years of recording. It was the lowest church engagement among the next generation. And then as Asbury Outpouring started and other revival type settings have happened, but then the critique was, okay, revival is supposedly happening, but it's not impacting our churches. Like church attendance isn't on the rise. And now, recently, 2 months ago, Barna put out a study saying that church attendance is on the rise and it's being led largely by Gen Z, which is it's amazing. So then the critique was, okay, church attendance is on the rise, but Gen Z is still biblically illiterate. And just 2 weeks ago, I saw an article put out by Relevant Magazine that said Bible sales are going through the roof, being led by Gen Z. So we're starting to see this kind of climb of true revival. And I believe that the spot that we're missing, like our churches are still struggling with pipeline issues. Missions organizations are still saying, where's the next generation in sending? But what I believe is the gap between where we're at right now, Bible sales are going through the roof and mission sending and all of that. I think the gap is this spot of discipleship and mentorship. How do we come in, lock arms with the next generation and walk them towards the mission field? How do we disciple them towards unreached people groups?
Well, so very helpful to have some practical ideas around that and to encourage. This is coming from both sides. We cannot wait for them necessarily to ask it in a nice, clear way. How do we initiate? When I say we, I mean the previous generations, initiating some of that contact as well and creating space for them. Just before we'll close soon, but I just want to ask you about this idea of vulnerability. I saw that term show up again and again. Could you just unpack that a little bit and why it's important?
Yeah, like we kind of started with, the next generation is looking at the world and saying, "Is this trustworthy?" They're asking that of your church. They're asking that of you as a mentor and as a discipler. They're asking that of you as a friend. They're saying, "Are you trustworthy? Are you reliable?" Because everything in their world is unreliable. They've grown up in an age on social media where you can put filters and you can add all these things that make everything look perfect, but their experience is so far from that. So I really believe as leaders, we need to lead the way into vulnerability, communicating this, that it's a safe place. And we touched on this earlier, but the way we do that is by leading the way into some of those uncomfortable places, acknowledging that we have struggled and wrestled with God, acknowledging that we've walked through seasons where we've questioned God's goodness, sharing the moments, the low moments, not just the high moments, sharing the low moments where you've struggled with depression or suicidal thoughts, and the fact that you're standing there and you're sharing it. It reminds me of Paul, honestly, when he says, "I'm going to boast in my weaknesses because in my weakness your power is made complete." Like all of those things. Like, how do we set the stage? How do we communicate that journeying with Jesus is an up and down journey? It's not smooth all the time, and there's a lot of pain and suffering, but God is good through those seasons. I think that sets the stage. When they see you walk into that space, they will be quick to follow you into that space, and you'll really get to the heart of where they're at and what they're wrestling with and all of that, which is where I think the true discipleship happens.
That's good. Well, let's go authentically together, right? In serving each other and as you said, walk along the way with that sharing of real life along the way and the goodness of God in the ups and downs. Well, I've got a familiar question. It's familiar to our audience. I mean, I'll ask you that in just a moment. But before I do, if our audience would like to learn some more from you, the paper, for example, where can they find that? In the show notes, but how can they find you?
Yeah, listen, my heart is walking alongside the church and organizations to lock arms with the next generation. So if there's ever an opportunity that I can be an encouragement or support to you, I would love that opportunity. You can find my stuff at billymcmahan.com. As well, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, or you can just shoot me an email. My email is bcmcmahan12@gmail.com.
And we will make sure that those links are included in the show notes for today's episode so that if you'd like to follow up with Billy, we'll show you the way. There's a familiar question, Billy, that we ask often toward the end of an episode. Imagine this. You're in a group together with people who want to do a great job of discipling and sending out Gen Z into global mission. They may be on the missions committee. They may be faithful lay people in their church. They might be pastors. They are listening. What do you want to say directly to that group?
I think number one, more than anything, is things are shifting. The future is bright. There's a lot of reason for hope. Oftentimes, I think coming from years past, there's this narrative that the next generation is not interested in the church or missions or anything like that. And God is legitimately moving. And I think that God has been intricately involved in the shaping and the formation of this generation. And I think it's exactly what the church needs in this season. And then number two, sorry.
Yeah, go. Sure.
And then number two, I would also say, don't wait. Plug yourself into a spot where you can plug into relationship and begin forming these mentorship opportunities with young adults in your church or in your organization or in your context. You would be surprised at the impact that it will have for the kingdom.
Well, there is some encouragement to take action as we finish today. Billy, thank you so much for sharing together with us today. We're thankful for those that are doing such careful research. This is based on data, friends. I've seen the paper, and we'll make that available in the show notes too. But you've also made it accessible to us, Billy. So thanks so much for being part of the Global Missions Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Praying for all of you.
Well, thanks for joining us for today's conversation. We do show notes for every episode. I think it's especially important in this case. There's some great resources that Billy has offered, including his paper. It is a significant paper, I've got to say. It's about 19 pages, so it's like reading a deep chapter on Gen Z. And there you can see all his ideas, both what he's learned about Gen Z and the suggestions he has for discipleship and mobilization of this generation. We want to invite you to subscribe, of course, on your favorite platform, or join us on Instagram and YouTube, where we have more and more video content there, and it's just a different way of engaging with our guests. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Global Missions Toolbox, and we invite you to stop by and check out the resources, especially for senders that have been curated there. It's globalmissionstoolbox.com. And if you'd like more from the podcast, up in the upper right, you'll find the tab, and that's where the search engine is. You can go by topic or just scan through the various episodes that we have done previously. We look forward to publishing again in 2 weeks, so we invite you to join us then. We'll continue this conversation about being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.